This week, I decided to venture into the depths of one of the most feared dungeons, not only in Final Fantasy XIV, but the entire world. One which strikes fear in the heart of all who witness them, and drives even the strongest to madness. The YouTube comment section. So a little while back, I made a video about a couple of the previous features in FF14 that got removed in expansions past, and why I was happy that they were smited from the game. I talk about belts, cross-class skills, weird funky underground materia that nobody uses, and a lot more. And there were a lot of comments on that video. Like a lot of comments. I read pretty much all of them, and while some of them had to be sent to the void of Shadowban Hell just for being, well, kinda mean or obnoxious, there are a bunch of interesting and valid points brought up. Things that I didn't mention in my original video, features that ruined the playing experience for other people, and they too are glad have been yeeted, and even a handful of suggestions of quality of life features that folk would love to see added to the game in the future. So today, it's not about me and what I think, it's about you and what you think. Here are the things in Final Fantasy XIV that Final Fantasy XIV players are glad have been removed, or things they wish would get added tomorrow. Pretty please, Square Enix?
The Glamour Dresser limit. Making it a catalog instead of a storage would be a dream come true.
So I feel you on this. I've been saying similar on and off for well over half a decade, because I want the exact same thing, and I want it badly. The way the Glamour System was originally was an absolute nightmare. You had to essentially store all of your glamours via your own sorting methods in your retainers, inventory or saddlebag. Be very picky about what you kept and threw away, and individually glamour every single piece, every single time, because there was no glamour plate feature at all. The Glamour Dresser and Glamour Plate functions were added as a fix for this janky system, and they were revolutionary for players at the time because what they were used to beforehand was just so bad. But they felt like somewhat of a half-measure fix. There was still a problem with the system. Firstly, the Glamour Dresser size, which at least has been expanded multiple times, but more than that, Glamour Plates sometimes breaking, limited sorting and organisation options in the dresser, the overall limits of them meaning that you often just collected the essentials, and loads more. What many wanted was a co-opt of the transmog system from World of Warcraft. A glamour book where when you open it, it is a catalogue of every piece of gear and weaponry you've ever collected, and with a simple click, you can extract an untradeable, stat-free version of that gear from the catalogue to use as glamour. Interestingly though, this is a feature that has been mentioned by Yoshi P in numerous live letter Q&A sessions. From live letter 13 back in 2014, he states, "A plan for a weapons and armour compendium has come my way. The plan is to allow you to read about the origins of each weapon and armour after you've completed the series, and we would like to implement this as well." Now I'm pretty sure this is referring to lore in-game rather than them actually being retrievable items, but it could act as somewhat of a precursor to a glamour book system, and that alone is super cool to see. Then, in live letter 16, somebody asks if there's any update on the weapon and armour log. He notes this: "We've currently finished off a lot of the details, but we have for plans of implementation we've been estimating the amount of work for each. The first idea would simply have players building a collection of weapons and armour, while the second idea would allow players to read the lore surrounding the gear they obtain. However, this data will affect the player data used in real time, so we are carefully investigating this at the moment. Next week we will reach a conclusion and proceed for actual implementation." Well, based on the fact that we never actually saw this feature, I guess we know what the verdict was, but this next live letter answer is the really juicy one. This is from a Q&A after a live letter in 2015. "Do you have plans to implement a feature such as a book that records items you have obtained once and you can drop that item but still use it for glamour? With this feature it'll free up the inventory space." Yoshida says, "We have no plans for this. We would increase the inventory space if this was possible." And then, from a more recent Q&A at last, "We have so much equipment in the game but it feels like a waste because it's either we equip them or glamour them. Is there another use for those items, like having them registered as a glamour entry in a catalogue? By the way, my glamour dress is almost full." He says, "Ouch, this definitely hurts as you're bringing back the old idea of a glamour log. I mean, we wanted to do so. We even had the text and all already. We cannot include them all because it's too full and the data couldn't handle it. I mean, if we can somehow make it work, it would be nice, but we're definitely out of space to save such data. We definitely want to realize it one day, but yeah, I'm sorry." So yeah, unfortunately it looks like this is never going to happen, or if it does, it'll be far, far in the future once some more of FF14's back-end technical spaghetti issues have been further ironed out. It's a shame, because this is such a brilliant potential feature that I'm sure many, including me, would love to see.
I would say it would make all fishes happy if fish baits had their own inventory separate from your inventory.
Please, oh my god, please, we need this right now. I don't care how you do it. Give us a bait saddlebag or a proper functioning bait box with an inventory, anything, I don't care. All I know is right now, I have a bait retainer page because I can't stand having it all in my inventory because it just looks too messy. And it's a huge hassle needing to teleport back and forth. Please, for Dawntrail, I beg of you.
Double rings make small difference, but I'm sure a few people will agree, because some rings be like, you can only have one of these in your inventory and just for rings.
You know? I actually agree with this, I think. We had belts removed due to the equipment bloat, and I can't really think of any major downsides if that second ring got the axe as well. Especially because right now we have overall less armory chest space for rings compared to any other piece of gear, with 50 slots for 2 rings versus 35 slots for one of every other major gear piece. It'll also somewhat help alleviate the issue in Savage of first turn loot being way more annoying to obtain than later turns, because you generally just need more of it. Because there'll be a number of jobs that will use Tombstone Biss as their preferred pick instead, it'll help speed up the gear progression process just a little bit.
I want this shortcut in a story dungeon, in case I die to a boss, to take me right to the boss I died to, not have me run down a corridor.
Okay, you know what? I'll be real, I've never actively thought of this in my life. But it's a good point. This is so true. When dungeon runs go awry, the salty run back to get to do the boss again is pretty annoying and flat out unnecessary. Surely fixing this would be as simple as moving the teleport points in dungeons to just before boss encounters rather than in their room after they've finished, and then you make the teleport condition to pulling the boss and dealing damage to it rather than defeating it. It's definitely a very minor quality of life fix, but for me it would be nice to see.
As a monk during Heaven's Ward, I'm so glad they removed TP. Every Astro was more of an enemy than the actual enemy. You had a good solid minute of attacks, then you get to sit in the kitty corner taking a breather because now your in-game stamina was the same as your real-life stamina.
I initially didn't add TP to the previous video, because I thought it was a little cliche and overused. But I've since had a bit of a realization. It's actually been like what, over 4 years since TP and its many grievances were removed? There's a massive subset of the FF14 player base that never ever had to deal with it in any way, shape or form. So when TP functionally existed in combat, it was supposed to be like MP for Disciple of War jobs, but it was just kind of broken. Every skill used a set amount of TP, and until Stormblood, for some inane reason, using AoE abilities and skills just cost an insane amount of TP on average, like 100 plus. Using your AoE rotation in a dungeon was not free. If your party wasn't super efficient in their damage, it was pretty standard to just flat out run dry on TP within a few mob packs, and spend the rest of the dungeon hoping you can use the single target boss encounters as a chance to catch back up. It was not ideal by any means. Then there was the fact that certain jobs like Early Heavens or Dark Knight and Monk full stop that would run into TP deficit just from doing their standard rotation after an extended period of time. It was rough. Melee jobs had a cross-class action called Invigorate that gave them back TP, but for Monk it just wasn't enough. They had the option to spend their 5 chakra stacks on damage or on an ability that would give them back TP, and there were times where unfortunately they'd just have to do that. Astro cards worked very differently back then too, as each card had a unique effect that either increased damage or resources in some way. The Arrow cast increased recast speed, meaning you would get out more GCDs while under its effect, costing you more TP. And if you popped Sprint, it would completely deplete your TP in the process, making for a truly horrific mix. Things are much better now on that front. Glad it's gone.
One annoying thing people seem to have forgotten even existed: damage type debuffs.
Damage type debuffs on enemies were another one that I think I just forgot just how long they've been removed for. For most jobs, they had the option of applying their own debuff naturally as a part of their rotation. So Warrior would use slashing debuff, and they could apply slashing debuff themselves, or they could say rely on a ninja to help them out and apply the slashing debuff for them. Monk could apply blunt resistance down themselves and it would necessary to buff their damage, but we're not really going to talk about those debuffs, their upsides, their downsides or their synergies today. We're going to talk about a different one. Dragoon also had their own debuff to apply, piercing debuff, and it all sounds hunky-dory, right? Well, ranged DPS also used piercing debuff to increase their damage, and yet they had no way to apply it for themselves whatsoever. They needed a Dragoon to get the damage buff. So if you were in a party without a Dragoon, you just flat out did less damage, no matter how hard you tried or how perfectly you played. This led to situations, especially in PFs and statics, where you'd get ranged DPS that really cared about their funny numbers, refusing to play without a Dragoon, or declining joining statics that didn't have one. I've had that happen to myself actually back in Stormblood, and PFs very occasionally locking a Dragoon to ensure the ranged would be kept happy. In my opinion, these debuffs could have been somewhat repurposed to be both interesting and not a huge hindrance, but their removal is 10 times better than the status quo that used to exist. We didn't need them, really, and jobs should never feel hamstringed for not having another specific job in the party.
Remove the job limitation from glamoring.
I only have one word to say about this, and it's the correct word. Yes.
Accuracy is also a big one, especially for black mages.
So I do agree with accuracy being an absolute nuisance when it used to exist. Do you remember those accuracy cap images that used to go out every tier, and every melee had to ensure they had back and side max accuracy at the very least, and the tanks needed front accuracy too? But I think that the role that was most adversely affected by this was actually healers. Maybe I'm biased because I'm a jaded healer main, but healers came with absolutely zero baked in accuracy in their gear. This meant that in order for them to come close to reaching accuracy cap, they needed to stack AC melds in practically every materia slot. Materia now aren't exactly interesting or meaningfully customizable, but at least you get to see small power increases from using them. They're a net positive. Whereas with accuracy, you instead needed them to be able to play the game properly. They were just preventing a net negative. Accuracy was the worst of FF14 stats in my opinion, and today's game is only better for its removal.
Surprised you didn't mention having to sleep at an inn to get the rested bonus.
I actually didn't remember this at all. What on earth? That's hilarious.
One thing I'm very glad was removed from something back in 1.0, where character and class are their own levels.
So this one is news to me too, because I didn't play back in 1.0. What I do remember hearing about extensively though was the fatigue system. In Final Fantasy XIV 1.0, if you received too much XP within a set amount of real life time, the game would intentionally reduce the amount of XP you'd receive going forward by a percentage for the rest of the 24-hour period. It got removed later down the road in patch 1.18, but what an absolutely bizarre decision that was on the whole. They want you to not play the game too much. From the screenshots I've seen, it seems like when you defeat an enemy you'd gain overall XP as well as job XP, and unlike in today's FF14, you had a core character level that wasn't tied to your job in any way. That's really interesting actually.
Couple of things I remember. Summoner and Scholar pets used to be able to be hit by debuffs and O attacks.
So this one is true. Your fairy being able to take damage was annoying and definitely had its downsides, but on the whole, I honestly feel like the removal of the fairy as a targetable party member also came with a number of downsides associated. First of all, being able to cast Adloquium on the fairy and then use that to set up a deployment tactics spread low was super fun, engaging and useful because the fairy was still immune to a number of types of damage. Later on, when fairy immunities were given some buffs across the board, this also meant that you could effectively use Succor to shield a raid wide. The party would take the hit, it would break their shields, the fairy would not take damage to it, and then you can spread the Succor shield from the fairy back to the rest of the party. There was tons more cool fairy tech that you used to be able to do, which is unfortunately lost to time. Shame really.
Losing 25% or 50% health with weakness and brink of death. Like you were just doomed to die since you were just at half health for the next 2 minutes.
Yeah, this is another good example of a feature that the developers realised was just hurting combat economy on the whole, and balanced it to allow players to have an easier time. Good change. So these are some of the most intriguing comments that I found and I wanted to talk about with you today. Because a few people answered with this and I found it really interesting, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one simple question. If you could have one thing added to Final Fantasy XIV right now, what would it be? Let me know in the comments, and I'm told that this is the part of the video where I ask you to like it, or the YouTube gods will smite my channel from the recommended, so I always appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed your stay as much as I enjoyed making this. I'll see you next week with another video. My next one is going to be really big. Have a great day.